Iran is stronger today than it was before the war started. This is literally the nightmare scenario that we've been worrying about.
Trying to find a truck in California.
These little things here are the Shahed drones.
Yeah.
Okay? And what we're doing in this area, which is mountainous, so this is why we have a three-dimensional, it's not just a two-dimensional problem, it's a three-dimensional problem. If anybody's running out of ammo, it might be America running out of interceptors to shoot things down, but we don't know that as a fact.
Okay, so I've got some numbers here about public support. Based on recent polling from mid-2026, the ongoing military conflict with Iran remains highly unpopular with the general American public, but support is sharply divided along political lines. Overall, roughly 27 to 34% of Americans support the war, while a solid majority of 53 to 57% oppose it. Did Iran charge people to go through the Strait of Hormuz before this?
No, never did.
Did they control the Strait of Hormuz at all?
Well, before the war started, not at all. Before February 28, Iran did not control the Strait of Hormuz. What Iran did is it moved from survival to ambition. If somebody killed our president, his wife, the first lady, members of the first family, half of the cabinet, all of the leaders in the Pentagon, all of the leaders in the CIA, and about a third of the Congress. That is what we did to Iran.
Robert Pape, with everything that's going on with Iran at the moment, the US-Iran war, and everything that I've learned from you in the two previous conversations we've had on the Diary of a CEO, I'm guessing that you're not really surprised by what we're seeing now.
No, I'm not. I've been modeling the bombing of Iran for 20 years. The fact is the modeling has held up. And literally month by month by month, when we were first here, the big surprise for most people was that we bombed the regime in Iran and it still stood. It survived, even though we killed the supreme leader and something like 137 of their top leaders. Think about that. So that would be like if somebody killed our president, his wife, the first lady, members of the first family, half of the cabinet, all of the leaders in the Pentagon, all of the leaders in the CIA, and about a third of the Congress. That is what we did to Iran in those opening weeks in March. And nonetheless, that regime survived. And that was something that modeling showed for that 20 years. That was based on substantial patterns in history where air power alone had never toppled a regime, going all the way back to World War I. Most people had not really heard that before. Many people, even in the military, did not fully know how much President Trump went up against the weight of history. Then we shifted. We shifted to 6 weeks of a bombing campaign. And then what did we do? We shifted over to a 2-month blockade. Well, that was another version of punishment. So
the US said that they were going to block the Strait of Hormuz, basically trying to take control of it themselves.
That's right.
And therefore kind of punishing the rest of the world.
Well, they didn't want to punish the world. That did happen, but what they wanted to do was punish Iran. So they were trying to coerce Iran to get the government to surrender control of Hormuz. So keep in mind, what happened is on February 28th, that regime change bombing happened, and it went on for a few days. But by March 2nd, March 3rd, Iran controlled Hormuz, literally within a few days. The ships stopped cold. And they basically have not reopened except for teeny tiny periods of time in a modest way. And then you're stuck. How do you get Iran to give up control of Hormuz, or do you let Iran continue to control Hormuz for as far as the eye can see? That's been the dilemma we've been in, Stephen, since really the first week in March. And now it's become clearer to the world. That is the core dilemma. We're at a fork in the road. Either we physically take Hormuz back, all those other tactics, even the MOU didn't work, didn't get
the MOU,
the Memorandum of Understanding.
Did Iran charge people to go through the Strait of Hormuz before this?
No, never did.
Did they control the Strait of Hormuz at all?
Well, before the war started, not at all. Before February 28, Iran did not control the Strait of Hormuz. What Iran did is it moved from survival to ambition. So Iran saw there was an opportunity with the bombing because the United States had we didn't even have our Navy here. There was no means whatsoever to sort of offset this Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz. Nothing at all. Iran took this as an opportunity, and the opportunity was to seize power.
So is it fair to hypothesize that actually this war might have strengthened Iran because now it has this control over energy on a global basis that it didn't have before?
Without a doubt, Stephen. I don't say this with any happiness. There's really no question at this point that Iran is stronger today than it was before the war started on February 28th. And that's because it controls the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that it can threaten at will virtually any ship that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. It's demonstrated this over and over and over again. Even when the ships turn off their transponders, they are still able to threaten ships as they go through. And every time a ship tries to run the gauntlet, they run into a drone, mine. They run into basically Iran's barrier. And that is Iran's power.
There was a tweet that went viral this week about this. I'm going to read the tweet here.
Please.
It says, "I'm confused. The US has the most powerful military on earth. We've bombed the hell out of Iran for 4 months. Trump says their Air Force, Navy, and nearly all of their missile capabilities are destroyed. So how is Iran still capable of hitting US bases right now?"
Because only a small fraction of its drone arsenal is necessary and missile arsenal in order to inflict that damage. Iran entered this war with thousands, we think tens of thousands of drones, ballistic missiles, anti-shipping missiles, which are lower sea-skimming cruise missiles. And even though we have destroyed large fractions of their missiles, they have plenty left over to hit these targets because they're doing saturation attacks. They're essentially doing swarms. They're saturating our defensive capability, and the drones and missiles that get through, plenty enough to damage it to the point we can barely use it if at all.
Trump said they have no Navy, it's been knocked out. They have no Air Force, that's been knocked out. They have no air detection, that's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out. Virtually everything they have has been knocked out. He said that on Truth Social in May 2026. If everything has been knocked out, then how come there's no safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz? How come this weekend we saw more Americans tragically die because of Iranian attacks?
Because what they have left, we can't knock out, and is plenty to do the damage. That's the fundamental problem. We took out the easy stuff to hit. They didn't need it in order to seize control of Hormuz and keep Hormuz and start to defend themselves against more aggressive pressure. And the bottom line is that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to eliminate that capability. We would do it in a heartbeat if we could right away.
Explain to me in just simple terms why it's so difficult to remove that capability. You know, I was looking at this picture here, which shows the size of a drone relative to another object, which in this case is a car. So I guess there was two questions, which is like, where do they hide these, and how easy is it to make one of these drones?
So they hide those drones, Stephen, everywhere. Okay. They're in drone caverns, they're in warehouses, they're everywhere. They could be, so that drone, just to kind of give you a sense here, would easily fit in this room. But the reason this is so difficult is notice how small that is here, that drone, compared to the scale of where it could be. And this is what I really want to show you, because this is, I think, the hardest part to explain to people as I'm talking in whatever format I'm talking, is it's the scale of eliminating the drone and missile threat is much bigger than people realize because they're hearing measurements. Well, we've destroyed X percent and Y percent. And that's why you're getting the question. But if you look at this map, this is what where these drones, these Shahed 136, could literally be anywhere in this radius, 500-mile area. And notice how huge this area is. This area like this is bigger than California. It's 1.5 times the size of California.
So I guess it's like trying to find a truck in California.
It's like trying to find a truck in California. These little things here are the Shahed drones.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we're doing in this area, which is mountainous, so this is why we have a three-dimensional. It's not just a two-dimensional problem. It's a three-dimensional problem.
We'll show some of these visuals on screen now just to show what the terrain, where they're hiding these drones might be like.
They could be anywhere in these mountains. There's all kinds of, and if we kind of imagine this as a visual, so this is the general problem here we have, which is just this stuff could be anywhere. And now these are the drones, and this is the terrain that the drones are going to hide in. And notice I've just sprinkled some here, but now I'm going to cover these up with more terrain. And notice you can't see those drones anymore. And now I'm going to put in some more drones somewhere else. And now we're going to put another layer in. And this is again, it's the three-dimensional part of the problem, meaning hard to find from the air. Now, if I get my people out and I start going in, now I could start to dig them out. But let's just keep doing this for a while. So now I'm putting in another, say, 20 drones, and I'm going to cover it yet again. And then I'm going to put in another set of drones, and I'm covering it yet again.
I guess you could put all the drones in there and you would still be able to cover them.
You would, yes, but you wouldn't do it you do it in layers. So they're going to make it so that if you find one, you're going to have to work really hard. You have to get them drone by drone by drone, or at least in clusters of them.
I guess also an important point of context is they're also making new ones this whole time.
Exactly. So our estimates that we have leaked from the Pentagon are in April. That's months ago. These drones, they were making 55,000 a year and giving them to Russia. So just think about that. That's thousands every single month. Why haven't they made another 5,000 or 10,000 drones since April? If you want this to open, so let me
the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz. So now let me just explain. So this is our problem. If you want the Strait of Hormuz to open, it's not good enough to say, oh, look, I've found like dozens or hundreds of these drones. You've got to persuade the shipping companies that their ships are safe. They don't obey orders from the Pentagon. You can't order the shippers to go through.
Because the ships are expensive.
The ships are expensive.
How
and
expensive?
The crews don't want to, in the many millions. Millions and millions of dollars. I don't know the exact amount of these tankers, but each tanker will carry between 700,000 and over 1 million barrels of oil. And so they have quite and you can do the math right there to see how much each ship is worth carrying that much oil.
So I've got some data here then. It says President Trump authorized the emergency release of 172 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Reserve, designed to be pumped out over roughly 120 days. This wasn't just a US issue or the US acting alone. The US drawdown was part of a massive coordinated effort by 32 member nations of the International Energy Agency, who collectively agreed to release 400 million barrels from their emergency stockpiles. Because these massive releases were done to offset the Hormuz blockade, the US Strategic Reserve has been heavily depleted. And as of July 2026, the reserve has dropped down to roughly 300 million barrels, which marks the lowest level the reserve has since 1983, a more than 40-year low.
They're being depleted. Once you spend your reserve, you don't get it refilled. And that's what I think President Trump was talking about when he said we're about to run out of oil in 4 weeks. That was exactly the date, because we've just run to the date of that quote. What you just read is we're coming to about the 120th day. And so what that means is all of that cushion that we had in the system to protect the price of gas already went up. Now you have even more risk. And then on top of that, Stephen, we have another set of problems besides the oil itself, which is refining capacity in the world. So we don't put crude oil in our cars. We put gasoline in our cars, diesel as well. Well, how do you get the gas and the diesel? You refine the crude. So that means the refineries need to work. Well, where are much of the world's refineries? In the Persian Gulf. Not just oil comes through the Persian Gulf, refined product, they're called distillates. They come through the Persian Gulf as well. Now, so that means you've shut down something like 25% or a third of the world's refining capacity. Now let's marry this to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine's blasting Russia refineries in Russia. So what's happening, Stephen, is you are getting not just the decline of crude itself is about to run out, but the refining capacity now has been heavily strained and limited. It might be down, 40%. I don't know the exact number, but it's something on that order. And what you're seeing then is what I think President Trump was seeing a month ago, which is he wanted the Strait of Hormuz to open, but he also didn't want to own the L. And what President Trump has decided is he'd rather take the risk with the world's economy than own the L, own the loss. And maybe he'll change his mind.
Okay, so I've got some numbers here about public support. Based on recent polling from mid-2026, the ongoing military conflict with Iran remains highly unpopular with the general American public, but support is sharply divided along political lines. Overall, roughly 27 to 34% of Americans support the war, while a solid majority of 53 to 57% oppose it. But then when you look at MAGA, it says that 77% to 85% of MAGA support the war. Those are MAGA Republicans. And only 5% to 14% of MAGA Republicans oppose the war.
That's right. So what you are seeing is the divisions in our country, which have been building for years, are still in existence with this war, and they're becoming hardened in this war. And as deaths occur, this is likely to harden the division, not shift, at least not shift much of MAGA to the anti-war position. And the reason is because just as Trump complained when President Biden pulled out from Afghanistan, this is going to be not just a loss for Trump if he pulls out. This will be viewed as an insult to the people who died. And so people will say, so if we leave, did those people die as a mistake? Was it a mistake? Were their deaths worthless? That's a hard thing. And that's one of the reasons why when troops die in war for months, this can harden support for a war, possibly even grow it. Over time. Yes, it tends to whittle down, but in the near term, deaths can actually harden support for the war. And that's a thing that most people aren't really fully grasping yet.
How real is the risk that the US will do some kind of limited ground operation with boots on the ground in Iran?
Well over 50%. I think it's bordering on 70% now. And the reasons are that, number one, the economic crisis that President Trump was trying to prevent, and therefore the economic costs that will hurt him later, is already starting to become baked in. What you're hearing this morning with the Houthis closing the pipeline area around Yanbu, it's called, this port city in the Red Sea, where the 4 to 5 million barrels of Saudi oil is coming out. What that is going to do is make the economic crisis even more baked locked in, even more likely, unless it's immediately reversed. And even if it was immediately reversed tomorrow, that could be reversed again the next day after that. This is starting to spiral out of control because it's not just up to President Trump now to put this genie back in a bottle. President Trump can actually still can withdraw, but right now, Iran has to stop the escalation. It has to let the Red Sea oil flow. It has to allow ships to flow from Hormuz. And Iran is in a mood for revenge. Iran there's emotions coursing through Iran, but it's not causing Iran to pull back. It's causing Iran to want revenge. And the Supreme Leader's statement just of a couple days ago, this was Saturday, 2 U.S. soldiers were tragically killed in Jordan. He called it, what the Supreme Leader did was use the phrase that he's going to deliver unforgettable lessons to America. Unforgettable lessons is the exact phrase by the Supreme Leader over the weekend. What you are seeing here, Stephen, is as Iran started to shoot at ships here to try to reinforce the MOU, President Trump upped the ante. Now we're in our ninth day of bombing in a row. Now Iran is upping the ante, and Iran is upping the ante in multiple ways. It's attacking our base in Jordan, which it only rarely done since March, actually. It's now with the Houthis closing the Red Sea, and we haven't yet talked about Kuwait, and we should talk about what happened here over the weekend here in Kuwait, because this is a harbinger of what's to come, because it shows how ferocious the anger is by Iran and how hard it's going to be to stop this spiral of escalation. And that is what is one of that's what's going to lead to President Trump thinking long and hard about putting those ground forces in, because we're not making an independent decision now.
So you said there's a 70% chance that troops could be put on the ground in Iran.
Yes, I think probably within the next month. Maybe even shorter than that. It could even be by the end of this week.
Showing me on the graph that you've just shown, the escalation ladder, you can call it, and where we are now. What is the most probable next thing that you think happens with this war?
The biggest thing I'm worried about is a mass casualty attack against American troops or American civilians.
Where?
Against American troops in the Middle East, but I'm specifically worrying about a barrage of ballistic missiles against our naval ships in the Gulf of Oman. So Iran is showing through the targeting that it's already been doing in the last week and a half, an exquisite ability to precisely target. And we don't know for sure they're able to track the movement of our naval ships in the Gulf of Oman, or they're getting help with either from the Chinese or the Russians in doing that. But I'm specifically worried that as this escalates, they've just closed the strait, they've just closed the Red Sea. If we keep going forward, and we'll find out if Trump will pull back or not, but if we keep going forward, one of the big things I'm concerned about this week, next week, would be an attack on a ship. And I think it would be a barrage attack. The second thing I'm concerned about is because we are now literally threatening ground occupation. That's the biggest risk factor for suicide terrorism in my 25 years of studying suicide attacks. We haven't talked about that, Stephen. And the reason we haven't talked about it is because we were pretty far away from the big risk factor of how you start a big suicide terrorist campaign. That is now changing. I've talked to my Substack about this. Glad to talk to you about it now. But I'm concerned about a mass casualty attack against Americans. This could be against an American airliner. It could be against, Americans on a commercial airliner. This could be against Americans, say businessmen in Aqaba, So you might know there have been attacks recently in Aqaba, which is this really lovely resort town. I've never been there, and the fact is there are American businessmen moving all around the Middle East now to build these pipelines, and so I can imagine there being terrorist attacks against the hotels that they're staying at. The German and British embassies have just ordered their evacuation. America State Department has issued an advisory over the weekend for Americans to start leaving the region. But I'm concerned about terrorist attack because threatening or actually doing ground control, controlling pieces of homeland territory, is the biggest risk factor for suicide terrorism. That's what causes people more than anything else to strap on bombs to kill others while they're killing themselves. So before we explain in detail, so when you say, Stephen, what I'm looking for in the next few weeks, I'm seeing the spiral of escalation now occurring. It's a two-sided spiral. It's not just President Trump. Iran is escalating here as much as Trump, if not more. And in this spiral of escalation, there could be a mass casualty attack, either against our troops or against American civilians. And the American civilian attack could be anywhere in the world. It could be in Indonesia. It could be London. It could be anywhere. And if that mass casualty event happens, I think what you're going to see is that this is likely going to cause that division we just discussed here in America, support for the war, to harden even more. And you're going to get, though, intense support for continuing the war now to stop mass casualty attacks by Iran in the future.
So even if Democrats win the midterms and try to halt the war, Trump could bypass them because he holds massive constitutional advantages as commander-in-chief. He can simply veto any war powers resolution or funding restriction passed by Congress, which would then require an incredibly difficult two-thirds supermajority in both chambers to override. Furthermore, mirroring the arguments of almost every president since Richard Nixon, Trump could evoke his Article 2 constitutional authority, claiming he has the inherent power to defend America's interests and troops without needing legislative approval. Finally, even if Congress refuses to authorize new funding, the president can use emergency transfer authorities and creative accounting to shuffle existing Pentagon budget funds to keep the military operations running in the short term.
You've just defined a constitutional crisis. Congress will think it has the power. President Trump will think he has the power. That is what is a constitutional crisis. And that's why these midterms, as my don't mean to say it quite in this context, but as you know, I have a book coming out, Our Own Worst Enemies. The preface is called The Most Dangerous Elections in Our Lifetimes. That is why this election coming up will be the most dangerous election in our lifetime, because the tensions now are growing on top of all that. They're not calming down those waters. The Iran war is making all these worse. And what you just read is the tension here that could well come, because the Democrats are not going to want there to be a forever war. And they're likely to fight really hard once they control once they control one or both houses of Congress. President Trump will want to fight really hard for his legacy and his domestic agenda, including deportations, including ICE. So this will all come together. These will not be compartmentalized, separate issues as we get into the midterms. That's why I'm saying that the midterms. We're not heading to a future where it's just about what happens to military bases overseas. It's just about what happens to ships overseas and what's happened in Hormuz. These lines, the domestic political violence in the United States, I call this the era of violent populism, and the growing tensions in the country over the Iran war. These two lines, the domestic crisis and the international crisis, are about to come together. And as I told my research team in the summer of 2024 in talks I gave in Chicago, my nightmare, they asked me what my nightmare scenario was. This was in the fall of 2024. And I said, my nightmare scenario is we have an international crisis at the same time as we have an election. In the fall of 2024, we really didn't have that. Now we do. And this is, we're heading into the fall of 2026. And this was always my nightmare scenario.
Why? What does that mean? What are those two things colliding?
Those two things colliding start to look like the 1960s.
And what happened in the 1960s?
The 1960s, we had mass demonstrations. We had anti-war violence. We had anti-war terrorism with the Weather Underground. We had multiple assassinations that occurred. Martin Luther King, it was Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The convention in Chicago, there was just mass demonstration. Mayor Daley in Chicago gave a shoot to kill order. I already mentioned to you the Weather Underground string of bombs that they set off. So what we faced in the 1960s was the collision of domestic political tension with an unpopular war. That's how you got the chaos of the 1960s. I have a whole chapter in the book about the 1960s and why it was so particularly intense.
So do you think that Trump is likely to lose the midterms as things stand? Do you think the Republicans are likely to lose?
Here's the thing. If we have a mass casualty attack, this will increase the odds of Trump and the Republicans winning in the midterms. And I think if we have a world economic crisis without the mass casualty attack, then I think it's likely that the Republicans will lose in the midterms.
Okay.
So I think we have the reason I can't give you a clean answer to this, which I know people want. They would, because we have multiple specific issues here that are now as part of the spiraling violence. Steve.
And three months isn't awful long.
It's a long time because that mass casualty attack could happen in October. And it doesn't have to be command directed by Iran. It can occur, the mass casualty attack against Americans can occur because it's an inspired attack. The supreme leader is issuing statements that sound almost like Baghdadi, that was the leader of ISIS, issuing statements to encourage inspired attacks. That was the suicide attacks in Paris in November 2015 that killed over 100 people. That was San Bernardino. So we saw leaders inspire attacks before, and the supreme leader's statements are eerily close to the same words.
Is the current US air campaign sustainable? You hinted at this earlier on, that actually the US might be running out of some of their weapons. It's estimated that the daily cost of this war for America is around $2 billion a day. And Iran's ability to continue these sort of asymmetric attacks with drones and other things doesn't come at such a high cost, and seems, from the example you gave with the bowl earlier on, to be more sustainable. So is there actually a risk here that the US will run out of weapons?
I think that there's a risk we'll run out of interceptors to shoot down missiles, but even that's pretty low, because what's really happening in our arsenal of weapons, Stephen, is we are using a lot of interceptors, especially, say, Patriot missile interceptors, to shoot down incoming ballistic missiles, but we're drawing from stocks in Asia and in Europe. This is one of the reasons Zelensky can't get Patriot missiles, at least not very many of them. It's because we're now moving most of the stocks here for the Persian Gulf. So I think that there's some chance we'll run out of those interceptors, but even there, I think it's low. But literally, in terms of the bombs, it's a gross exaggeration to expect that we are going to run out of bombs to drop from aircraft. And there's two reasons for that. In order to make a precision bomb, most people don't know what it takes these days. And it's true, we can spend a lot of money making a precision bomb, but we can literally take dumb bombs, 500-pound dumb bombs, and strap a backpack on them that will connect with GPS and have little cords to the fins of the bombs in order to turn a dumb bomb into a precision bomb. Those fanny packs are about $20,000, maybe 25. So we can make them much more easily than people think.
So what do you think the United States / Trump's objective is at this particular point? Like, what is the goal The real goal? Because there's lots of press conferences I see where they say it's nuclear weapons, it's this, that, and the other.
I think President Trump's goal between now and the midterms is very simple: a symbolic victory.
And what would that look like?
That would look like a victory that would hold for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And that would be an opportunity to show that President Trump fought back. I think that's how this would be framed by President Trump's supporters and those who support the war. And it would be, I think President Trump would say, and this shows what we can do if you let us win. I think his words would be a little different.
Do you think he's stuck?
Yes.
Do you think he knows he's stuck?
I've never met President Trump. My research here, Stephen, has always looked at the actual words by decision makers. What I can tell you is what his incentives look like. And the incentives that I've laid out have been quite predictive of his behavior.
Do you want him to call you?
Yes.
And if he calls you, what is the advice you would give him on what to do next?
What I would do is try to design a several-year strategy to build a better balance of power in the region that we could, over a period of time, stabilize the world and stabilize the region. And I think that is the big issue that's being missed right now.
But if he says, listen, Robert, what do I do in the next 3 months because I've got these midterms coming up?
Then the answer is don't call me. I want to help President Trump, but I want to help America for real. These are not necessarily at odds, but the bottom line here is that everything I have to say to President Trump about the next 3 months, we've just done on this podcast, Stephen. But I am absolutely delighted to talk about how to actually build a more secure future for America and for the Gulf. And I just don't think that's happening. And I don't think the pressure that this must lead to an electoral victory for President Trump is likely to make the true security for America and the Gulf more likely. In fact, it's going to go the other way around. It will encourage the escalation trap. So that's why I'm stuck by my own logic of the escalation trap here. It's literally we have to move past the idea that the only acceptable option is an option that guarantees political success for an individual, even if it means the president of the United States.
What do you think Russia and China, who are often positioned as adversaries of the United States, what do you think they're thinking right now? And what do they want to happen? I guess China's being hurt by the oil situation. Russia's got their own situation going on with the Ukraine. What are they thinking?
I think China does not want there to be global instability, but at the same time, they don't want this to be a situation where Iran comes out smashed. I think that is that's simply not in the cards. I also don't think China is going to insert itself in a very forceful way. I think the idea that Iran might come out and militarily support the United States here, or militarily support with its own forces, Iran, is not likely to happen. So I think that what you are...
Why don't they want Iran smashed, China?
For President Xi, he explained quite a bit of this at the summit. He said to President Trump, you're a declining power. Are you going to fall into what he called the Thucydides trap? Meaning, are you going to launch a preventive war against China in Asia? And that's what President Xi said.
What about Russia?
What Russia is seeing is an opportunity to squeeze Europe economically. So I believe that what has been happening in the last few weeks here, the last month, is that Ukraine has actually been gaining not just strength with drones, but in a specific area called Crimea, in which Russia took and Putin took in 2014. There's been a mass exodus out of Crimea in the last weeks. Ukraine is putting more and more pressure on the supply lines coming into Crimea and also coming into Ukraine from Russia. And what Putin, I think, wants to have happen is that he will likely escalate more, put more pressure on Europe at exactly the time in the fall when the world economic crisis is growing because of Iran. And that is going to squeeze Europe, make it hard for Europe to fulfill the commitment they just made to Zelensky of $80 billion more dollars.
I guess my last question then, before I go to the diary, is if you were to predict how the next couple of months play out, what would your prediction be? And this is on probability, 51% probability of outcomes. What happens next?
I think we're going to, in the next few months, cross the threshold with ground operations into either one of the islands or part of the coast of Iran, because the world economic crisis is going to grow. The price of gasoline in the United States is likely to grow. And President Trump is going to be even more desperate to try to find a way to make it at least appear as if he has a plan to open Hormuz. It may not be real, it may only be symbolic, but I think, Stephen, that where we are heading is the more the crisis, the world economic crisis increases, and if there's a mass casualty attack, the more that crisis increases, the more President Trump is under pressure to demonstrate he has a way to open Hormuz, even if it's far off, and he needs a down payment on that. He needs something to show tangibly. And I think that's where the pressure will come from for crossing into stage 3.
I think it's worth saying in these conversations as well that there are 90 plus million Iranians who currently live in Iran and who are caught in the midst of this craziness and chaos. And sometimes in these conversations, we kind of don't really think about the fact that there's a nation that's just bigger than the nation I come from, the United Kingdom, who are right in the heart of this. And so every time Trump says he's bombed more people over the weekend or he's firing bombs, I always think about the real families that are caught right in the midst of all of this, that didn't choose this war, that are living in an environment where bombs are dropping on their heads. And I think for everybody all around the world that listen to this show, whether you're in the UK or the United States or Australia or Canada or wherever you are, South America, Asia, wherever, Africa, it's worth taking a second just to imagine what it would be like to know that the United States are dropping lots of bombs on the nation in which you live, and how that would feel psychologically, how that would feel for your children, how that would feel for you yourself, how that would impact your day-to-day life. And also, I guess, the uncertainty of not knowing when it's going to end, if it's going to end, and also hearing this term escalation trap and thinking that, this is actually going to escalate and troops are going to come into my country. And so there's a real human cost to this, which sometimes we leave out of these conversations.
And I have students and at the University of Chicago who are Iranian. They have families in Iran, and they ask me questions about this all the time. And sadly, what I have to tell them is that real hope for the Iranian people is 5 or 10 years away. And as this war escalates, it pushes closer to 10 than 5.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next. The question left for you is, if you could go back to a certain time and see something occur, or ask someone something you've always wondered about, what/who would that person/place be and why?
I think the key person I would ask would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He died before we dropped the atomic bombs. I would want to know from him, when he was developing and supporting the atomic bombs, did he imagine the world that would be created by the atomic bombs? Because in my lifetime, war has been a defining feature of my work. But the prospects of nuclear war have always overhung quite a bit of our work. We never want to get to anything like that. But I'd like to know from the person who had the most authority, power in order to make that future happen, who never even saw it. didn't even see it happen, but knew it was coming. I'd like to know from him, what did he think was truly going to come? Because I think that this would be extremely useful to know whether or not our leaders truly, how far out they can really see and understand how much their decisions today shape the world for decades to come.
Robert, thank you. We're very excited for your book, September 22nd. So do we have a pre-order link yet?
It's just up, actually. It's just up. So yes.
I have to say, when we first sat down, you said a bunch of things in terms of what would happen next. And I'm not sure I believed them all, because I don't know anything about war. And you never really think about the psychology changes, both at home, but also where the bombs are dropping. And it does appear that you've been largely correct about what you said would happen, this escalation that happens across all wars, that has happened also in Ukraine and Russia at the same time, but now we're seeing play out in Iran. So I have to give you your credit, because you have been, unfortunately, you've been right, I should say.
I would agree with the word unfortunately. So this is, part of me would like to be happy about this, but the truth is, and this is what I just was talking to my 97-year-old mother-in-law about, is I told her that you had invited me. Again, she's 97 years old, can't even get out of bed, Stephen. And I told her that it was one of the saddest things I had to agree to. And it's because of what it really means. The reason you're having me here is because things are bad for our country, and I want nothing more than for things to be better for our country.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming back. And, if we do come back again and convene, I hope next time it's on better terms, because we're analysing how it all resulted in peace for everybody, especially the people that are living in Iran right now. Robert, thank you.
Thank you.